Long before the internet, Madonna had worked it out in 1985, her song Material Girl. On the surface, a bit of fun. Underneath it is a song about exactly this scoreboard, measuring people and yourself by the visible stuff.
The steady path, keep it moving slow. Every step you take is the way you grow. Take the steady path, let the rhythm guide. One step at a time to the other side.
There's a scene in When Harry Met Sally, Rob Reiner, 1989, that you'll almost certainly know, even if you've never sat down and watched the whole film. Sally is in a busy New York deli, mid argument with Harry, and she sets out to prove a point. She proves it, let's just say, comprehensively. The whole place stops, and a woman at the next table who's watched the entire performance looks calmly up at the waiter and delivers 5 words that sum up the theme of this episode. She says, "I'll have what she's having." Now, set the scene itself to one side, just sit with those words on their own, because as a description of how most of us relate to other people's lives, their careers, their houses, their holidays, whatever they seem to have that we don't, they're very nearly perfect. We glance across at someone else, we see what they appear to have, with no real idea what's actually going underneath it, whether they're happy, whether they can afford it, whether any of it's even real. And something in us just quietly decides, I'll have what she's having. That is the comparison trap. And most of us are sitting at that table in one way or another every single day. So today, we're going to discuss comparison, why we do it, what it costs us, and how to stop. I want to start with a statement of fact, not just an opinion or an observation. The comparison trap is not a character flaw. It isn't shallowness, and it isn't weakness, and it certainly isn't anything to be ashamed of. It is biology. Professor Steve Peters, the sports psychologist who wrote The Chimp Paradox, great book, and who's worked with some of the finest athletes this country's ever produced, explains the human mind with a model I've found genuinely useful over the years. There are, he says, 2 of you in there. There's the chimp, the fast, emotional, instinctive part of the brain, ancient, enormously powerful, and not remotely interested in your sensible opinion. And then there's the human, the calm, rational, values based you. And the chimp compares constantly, automatically. Nobody asks it to, because for almost the whole of human history, where you sat in the pecking order wasn't a matter of vanity, it was a matter of survival. Your rank decided whether you ate, whether you were safe, whether the tribe looked after you or quietly left you behind. So the chimp learned over hundreds of thousands of years to scan the room endlessly for where you stand in relation to everyone else. And here's the trouble. The chimp never got the memo about social media. It can't tell the difference between a real threat to your standing and a stranger's holiday photo, taken, by the way, on one sunny afternoon of an otherwise fairly ordinary week. It just sees they appear to have more, and it reacts, and there's a small sour dip in your mood before the thinking part of you's even registered what you're looking at. So if you've ever scrolled through LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, or stood at the school gates and come away feeling vaguely worse about your own perfectly good life without quite knowing why, that was the chimp. You're not shallow, you're human. And simply understanding that is the first step to taking some of its power back. Now, here's the deeper problem. It isn't that we compare. We were always going to do that. It's how we compare. We compare our messy reality with everyone else's edited highlights, and then wonder why we feel like we're falling behind. We take our own private doubts, the worries we'd never say out loud, the regrets, the things we'd never dream of posting, and we hold them up against everyone else's public highlights. Their good news, their announcement, their best 10 seconds, filmed, filtered, and broadcast to the world. It's the least fair comparison imaginable, and most of us run it dozens of times a day without ever noticing we're doing it. Theodore Roosevelt, a man who achieved a quite extraordinary amount in his life, and who still apparently found the time to feel he wasn't measuring up, put it in 6 words I don't think have ever been improved upon. He said, "Comparison is the thief of joy." It's one of my favourite quotes. And I'd ask you to really hear that, not as a nice line for a fridge magnet, but as a description of an actual theft. Because that's precisely what it is. The joy was already there. It was sitting quietly in the life you'd built, the life you were perfectly content with, right up until the comparison let itself in and walked off with it. And if you want to see what that theft really looks like, taken all the way to its end, watch the film Amadeus. Milos Forman, 1984. It's the story of Antonio Salieri, the court composer in Vienna. Respected, successful, comfortable, and genuinely gifted. He's everything he ever wanted, right up until a young man named Mozart arrives. Because in Mozart's music, Salieri hears a kind of genius he knows he'll never possess. And from that moment, his own success means nothing to him. His talent, which is real and considerable, becomes worthless in his own eyes, simply because it isn't Mozart's. He spends the rest of his life eaten alive by it. Comparison takes a man who had every reason on earth to be content and quietly poisons him from the inside out. That is the thief of joy. Not a slogan on a wall, a whole life stolen. And notice what Salieri was really comparing. Not his happiness against Mozart's, but his standing, his reputation, the outward measure of success. Because that's what comparison almost always fixes on, the visible stuff. The job title, the address, the car, the holiday photos. We rank ourselves against other people's outsides, the costume they happen to be standing in, with no real idea of the person or the reality underneath. None of this is new, by the way. Long before the internet, Madonna had worked it out in 1985, her song Material Girl. On the surface, a bit of fun. Underneath it is a song about exactly this scoreboard, measuring people and yourself by the visible stuff, the money, the cars, the lifestyle. And she sang, "We're living in a material world. I'm a material girl, material." Okay, I'll never sing again for you. This song is about the seductive but ultimately hollow pull of measuring love, success, and self worth by money and status. Exactly the mindset that fuels the comparison trap. The only thing that's really changed over the years is that the material world now lives in our pocket, lit up and open 24 hours a day. And that material world has a very particular hold on us. It quietly talks us into buying things that we don't need, with money maybe we don't have, to impress people we don't know, and half the time we don't even like. Because if appearances could fool an entire room long before the internet, just think what a filtered, cropped, perfectly lit photograph does to us now. The costume used to be physical. Now it's digital, infinite, and refreshed every few seconds. We've even invented a name for the feeling it leaves behind. FOMO, the fear of missing out. That low background hum that everyone else is at a better party, on a better beach, living a slightly better life, and that somehow your invitation got lost in the post. And it's relentless, isn't it? Precisely because it's so ordinary. You're not even trying to compare. You're half watching the television with your phone in your hand, and in the space of 2 minutes, you've scrolled past a wedding, a promotion, a new kitchen, and somebody's villa in Portugal. 4 small reminders that apparently everyone else is getting on rather better than you are. Nobody set out to make you feel that way, it just quietly happens. And notice how tightly this knots into what we were talking about last time. Last episode, we sat with the big question, how much is enough? Well, here is exactly what comparison does to enough. It makes it impossible. Because the moment your idea of enough is set by what somebody else has, the number can never sit still. They get a little more, and your enough quietly shuffles forward to match. The comparison installs itself as your scoreboard without you ever choosing it. Nobody sits down and consciously decides to measure their whole life against a neighbour's or an old colleague's. It just starts running in the background, silently marking everything you do. So the real work is to take that scoreboard back. Okay, right, so 3 things as usual, properly practical ones so that you can feel better about yourself. First, build your own scoreboard. Decide deliberately and ideally in writing what a good life actually looks like for you. Not relative to your neighbour or your brother-in-law or whoever you followed this morning. In plain absolute terms, what does a good day look like? A good year? Because if you don't define it for yourself, the world will happily define it for you by default. And you'll spend years playing a game you never agreed to join by rules somebody else wrote and never showed you. Second, catch the comparison in the act. When you feel that familiar little flicker, that the dip when a friend's news sounds better than yours, the jab of FOMO when a certain photo lands, don't scold yourself for it. That's just the chimp doing the only job it knows. But do stop just for a second and ask, what am I actually comparing here? Reality with reality? Or my behind the scenes with their edited highlights? Naming it honestly is usually enough to take the sting out of it. And third, come back to what genuinely matters to you. Comparison is, at its heart, a question about other people. Am I keeping up with them? Meaning is a question about you. Am I living a life I actually believe in? And you can't really hold both of those questions in your head at the same time. The more firmly you answer the second one, the quieter the first one becomes. There's a piece of music that puts the whole thing better than I can. Baz Luhrmann's 1999 track, Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen, is really just a collection of wise life advice spoken over music. And tucked away in the middle of it is a line that could have come straight from Theodore Roosevelt. It goes like this: don't waste your time on jealousy. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. The race is long, and in the end, it's only with yourself. I think that's the real answer to Roosevelt's famous quote. The life that truly matters isn't the one that attracts the most admiration. It's the one that feels authentic when you're living it. Real wealth, in the broadest sense, is usually invisible. It's found in your relationships, your values, your peace of mind, and your sense of purpose. Those are rarely the things that we compare, and yet they're the things that matter most. Now, I want to bring in a Stoic who doesn't get nearly enough attention. Contrary to what you might think, Stoicism isn't just Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. One of its most remarkable figures was Cato the Younger. Cato lived in a Rome obsessed with status, reputation, and appearances, a society where image mattered enormously. Yet he became famous for being almost completely immune to what other people thought of him. The remarkable thing is that this wasn't simply his personality, it was something he practiced deliberately. He'd walk through the streets of Rome dressed unfashionably on purpose, wearing colours that clashed, sometimes even going barefoot. Not because he couldn't afford better, he was actually a wealthy man, but because he was training himself to become indifferent to other people's approval. He understood something most of us struggle with today. If your happiness depends on what other people think of you, then your happiness is never really yours. So, Cato practiced not caring what the crowd thought. Small doses deliberately chosen, building the muscle of indifference, so that when it genuinely mattered, the opinion of the room had no grip on him whatsoever. And I find that genuinely brilliant, because the comparison trap runs on one fuel: caring too much about the scorecard. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Who looks more successful? Who seems to have more? And Cato spent his life turning that scoreboard down on purpose. And then, yes, all right, Marcus Aurelius, my favourite Stoic for this sort of thing, he put his finger on it perfectly. He said, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." And that really is the whole of it. All that energy, all that quiet, low level worry spent looking sideways at what everybody else appears to have, while your own life is sitting right there in front of you, available, already yours. So perhaps the better question isn't, how am I being perceived? Or do I look successful enough? Am I behind? What will people think? Perhaps the better question is much quieter. Does this actually matter to me? Or am I just dressing my life up to win approval from people who aren't even paying that much attention? So wear what you like, live what you value, and stop handing the room a vote it was never entitled to have. Now, I want to finish with a Monty Python film called Life of Brian. It came out in 1979, technically 1 year outside of my usual era, but I'm going to make an exception. Brian is desperately trying to convince everyone that he isn't the Messiah. He stepped onto his balcony to find an enormous crowd who've decided that he is. Almost pleading, He tells them that they don't need to follow him, that they should think for themselves. And then he says, "You're all individuals." And the crowd immediately shouts back in perfect unison, "Yes, we're all individuals." And Brian tries again, "You're all different." And again, the crowd replies together, "Yes, we're all different." And then from somewhere at the back comes one tiny voice, "I'm not." It's utterly ridiculous. It's also one of the sharpest observations ever put on film about human nature. We spend an extraordinary amount of our lives trying to be different, whilst quietly checking that we're not too different. We tell ourselves we're being authentic, yet we're constantly taking our cues from everyone around us. And that's exactly what comparison does. It persuades us that we're running our own race, whilst we're secretly looking sideways to see how everyone else is doing. The antidote isn't getting ahead of the people you've been comparing yourself with. It's realizing you never needed to be in their race at all. Which brings us back to Roosevelt. The answer to comparison is not to win someone else's race, it's to step out of it altogether, to decide what matters to you, to build a life that feels true from the inside, not impressive from the outside. Because in the end, that's the only race that was ever yours. Thank you for listening to episode 4. Next time, we're looking at something that quietly runs and ruins far too many of our days: the myth of urgency. Why everything feels desperately important, why most of it really isn't, and how to tell the difference. And until next time, slow down, think clearly, keep walking your steady path. I'm Paul Cleworth. Thanks for listening.
No turning back. Just keep moving on the track. Take the steady path, keep it moving slow. Every step you take is the way you grow. Take the steady